Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott.
Hello, Josh, my friend. Now, we do have a massive update on the old Starfield, the old Bethesda's Starfield. And there's quite a bit to get to in regards to this because there was a big old leak across the weekend. A whole bunch of screenshots got out there, a whole bunch of new game information got out there. But also, another thing that is also completely on the same level in terms of talking about is that Jeff Grubb, none other than VentureBeat's Jeff Grubb, got out there and just said it's going to be Xbox and PC exclusive, which is something that a lot of people assumed anyway. Obviously, the acquisition of Bethesda by Microsoft, $7.5 billion or whatever it was. You know, they were going to lock some properties down, but they have been dancing around it. He does say he can't speak on behalf of Microsoft, but he literally did tweet out, Starfield is exclusive to Xbox and PC, period. This is me confirming that. Not confirming it for Microsoft, I've confirmed it in terms of my reporting. What do you think of that before I get to everything else?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I think it's something that a lot of us have been bracing ourselves for ever since the big acquisition was announced, because while, you know, even back then there was a lot of talk about Fallout, a lot of talk about the Elder Scrolls, and even when people were talking in terms of those big franchises staying multi-platform, it was only ever in terms of those big franchises. With Starfield, this is a new thing from Bethesda, and there's no precedent that this should, quote unquote, should be on other platforms, you know? So I feel like when Microsoft was buying Bethesda, they were buying exclusives, and Starfield's the biggest thing from that studio in a long, long time, and it has no ties to any consoles at the moment, so it makes sense for them to go, yep, that's mine. That's ours now.
Do you know what's weird though is that, like,
exclusive.
This would have been, you know, because I'm going to get onto, you know, the leaked screenshots and some of the information, the gameplay stuff, which apparently is all from a 2018 build that's now gotten out there. But I wonder how much preliminary work they did on, you know, console, like PlayStation versions of this game that are just now going to be completely scrapped, because Starfield's been around for a long time. Like, you know, I think it was first revealed in 2018 during the E3, Bethesda's E3 thing with the official logo and everything. But we've been covering the name Starfield since like 2014, 2015. When some of the initial pieces of artwork got out there, or the first mentionings of it got out there. So I just kind of wonder, you know, after Microsoft stepped in and said, actually, we'll have you, then they've had to go, we'll just have to like can all this potential, all these conversations around PlayStation versions of the game.
Yeah, I'm sure like those conversations were in place initially, and then you had to quote unquote throw work away or just stop working on certain platforms. But at the same time, like you said, this has been in some stage of production since, you know, back in 2014 before Fallout 4 came out. So even back then they wouldn't have been working on PlayStation 5 versions, for instance. You know, like they wouldn't have got those SKUs until very, very recently. So I imagine that it was always in flux to some extent, and I imagine they were always developing for PC first and then figuring out how to move it from then on, as a lot of game development goes. And previously, anyway, Bethesda's always had like a really good relationship with Microsoft when they were promoting Fallout, when they do other stuff for other games.
Oblivion.
Often it's tied to Xbox anyway, like Oblivion. So I imagine like this acquisition would have probably been in talks for a long time. So yeah, I mean, it kind of sucks for people who currently own a PlayStation only that they're not going to get it. But in terms of like a Microsoft thing, I think it's a huge, you know, win from them, and hopefully it gives Starfield like more resources to be an even better game than it might have been previously.
I would also hope that in that regard that Microsoft being the overseers or Xbox being the overseers sort of step in and just say like, can you smooth the bugs? Because this is going to be representing the Xbox brand. It's probably most like, I mean, it is going to be on Game Pass day one and everything. So it's just like, I would hope that it's somewhere along the way Bethesda need to sort of stop being the scrappy kids in the corner and sort of just make sure their games release in functioning form. Anyway, so something else that happened across the weekend was a known Bethesda leaker called Skullsy getting involved in all the conversations and throwing out some of their own screenshots, as well as a whole bunch of information about the game. So they said that, like I said at the beginning, you know, this is all from the 2018 build of the game, but they said that according to their sources, there are certain things that they can now talk about. So we should just talk about these screenshots in general. They're very clean. I kind of thought they were very 2001 Space Odyssey style. Like I kind of feel like it's Bethesda going, you know, we're going to do our version of sci-fi, but it's going to be old school. It's going to be, you know, if No Man's Sky sort of was very Isaac Asimov, then this is very, you know, 2001 Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick style. But we do see some third-person and first-person shots. It looks like a shotgun-style weapon on the right-hand side. There's health and stamina meters. It does show a helmet with like a mounted camera, so I'd have to assume there's maybe vision modes or ways you can track stuff when you're in-game or something like that. There's also, like, they show different logos for different companies. There's Axion Energy and TEC. I'd have to assume that Axion Energy is the company that like makes the spaceship that you're in, because their logo is all over the interior of it. And one of the things that I kind of just picked out that I thought was cool, if you zoom in on the mini map or the icon on the bottom left hand side, it looks like Bethesda's put a ton of information in that little circle, because there is a oxygen/CO2 meter. There's what looks like a day-night cycle icon. There's what looks like a tiny little mini map, and there's a gravity meter as well, which is the gravity meter gets mentioned by Skullsy as well. But what do you think of all the screenshots and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, there's only so far I can get hyped about some screenshots of like a few walls and some spaceship walls and some
hey, there's a dude in there too.
Elements.
He's facing the other way though.
You're not wrong, there is a person in a spacesuit. I mean, yeah, it looked like a sci-fi game would, you know what I mean? I really think you're amazing, Scott Taylor, because you dove into these screenshots and you picked them completely apart, whereas they kind of just like washed over me in a way that I didn't scrutinize them in the way that I should. But I mean, in general, I do like the aesthetic that's in there, if that is the aesthetic that's going to go across the entire game. Like you said, something more inspired by retro sci-fi, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and maybe even like bits of the original Alien in there, which was very, 70s inspired, very heavy monitors and stuff like that. I dig that type of sci-fi in particular. So if that's the kind of visual style I'm going for, I think that would be really interesting to see that play out across the whole thing. And I'm interested to know more about like what you said there, stuff like the gravity meters, for instance. I want to know how movement's going to feel when you're on the ship compared to on some of the planets perhaps, or maybe whether you're going outside the ship on like spacewalks and stuff, trying to fix parts of whatever the hell's going on out there. So yeah, like for me, I'm generally excited for Bethesda to do a sci-fi game in general, and for it to have, hopefully, this kind of aesthetic leaning. I think that is interesting and not necessarily what I expected either.
In terms of just picking stuff apart, it reminds me of the before times, like when we there was more screenshots around, and it's just sort of, if you zoom in there and sort of look at that apart, to pick this apart, there's a HUD element that hints at this thing. It's been a while, Josh Brown, but every now and then you've got to dive in. So also, yeah, Skullsy started posting some different things about gameplay, different bits and pieces. One little tidbit though, I guess outside of gameplay, is that Starfield is going to be shown at E3 2021, which is obviously next month. They said that Bethesda are aiming for a March 2022 release date, but there's a small chance that it could release this year, but it makes more sense for it to come out next year. Another thing is factions. They mentioned the Black Fleet and the Space Nation Alliance, saying that the latter is very important to the Starfield lore, the Starfield universe as it stands. I'd have to assume that that's just some sort of galactic police force that maybe you can side with or something, if they're going to carry over Fallout-style faction stuff. They also say in regards to spacewalking that they can't fully confirm it, but do say that ships have exits and entrances specifically built for when there is high gravity or low gravity, which obviously lines up with the screenshot showing the gravity meter itself. We have barely seen spacewalking in many games. Like most games, sci-fi games, have you landing on a planet or something. It's very rare that you can just go outside a ship and just sort of ghost ride the whip between different planets. It tends to be, you're going to be either inside the ship or on a different planet or something. Makes me think of Dead Space though. Makes me think of how cool turning the gravity off or just jumping between different parts of a low gravity place are. What do you think of all these things?
I like that stuff because it makes me think of Dead Space included, but also my favorite game of all time, not really Prey 2017, which let you do a lot of spacewalky stuff and kind of maneuver around the ship in really interesting ways. And also Outer Wilds, which genuinely is one of my favorite games of all time. Like the way you have to account for the velocity and the momentum you have combined with the gravity of each celestial body that you're moving around. I just thought added a fascinating element of gameplay that I would like to see more games kind of adopt. And I do think there was a rumor going around, actually. It might have been this one, it might be in a separate one. I think it was on Reset Era, and someone was saying that when you're thinking of this game, you should be thinking of stuff like No Man's Sky and Outer Wilds, which makes me very, very excited.
I can't give me so much No Man's Sky influence in the industry. I mean, there was another thing doing the rounds from Skullsy from last week, that you think of Skyrim's Radiant quests, the idea that that game generates quests based on where you haven't been. The comparison they made was that that Starfield would have Radiant planets, which I'd have to assume means that it generates a planet for you to go to or something like that. But I would hope that No Man's Sky had a rocky launch. Obviously, we've all talked about it so much, but that game is nigh on the benchmark for current generation, how to even do a sci-fi game in the current generation. Like Outer Wilds takes a lot from that game too, in terms of just free form, open world exploration. You don't know what you're going to find, and it's more about, you know, it's both macro and micro exploration. Like you're going between these huge planets, but it's all about zooming in, finding this little tiny thing, and what does that all mean? And I love that is a new way to do a sci-fi game. I feel like going back through Mass Effect, like we both have been, like landing on different planets, getting a feel for how big that galaxy can be. I would hope that Bethesda do it right, and you know, make it so that you are landing on this bunch of different planets, but it feels big, it feels expansive. That was something that even the launch day knackered version of No Man's Sky still nailed, was an overwhelming sense of scope.
Totally. I mean, if they nail that, I think it would be genuinely incredible. At the same time, we've seen so many times when it comes to AAA sci-fi games try to hit that and make it satisfying and varied as it should be over a long period of time, and they often don't get there straight away. You know, you say No Man's Sky, that's obviously like an incredible game now, but at launch, obviously there were a lot of complaints. I mean, it still managed the you know, the idea that you're in this procedurally generated galaxy, but I know there was a lot of you know, disappointment with the things on those planets. You know, obviously coming to and from the atmosphere was cool, but what you found there wasn't necessarily all that inspired all of the time. And there was a similar issue happened with Mass Effect Andromeda, for instance. You know, originally that game was going to let you set out to a bunch of different planets. I think there was going to be originally like 30 plus, and initially, even before then, in pre-production, it was supposed to be this massive, you know, galaxy full of potential. Obviously, we ended up with like 8 planets in that game, which was still cool, but the scope of something like this is so huge, and I just hope that you know, they have the push to fulfill that potential and not just make it feel like another one of these empty kind of universes. That's a lot of negativity for something that's just completely speculation at this moment in time. But I think if you're gonna release a game like this, you need to nail that element. If you're focusing on it, it needs to be really good.
No, man, I think it's healthy skepticism. I mean, this is still Bethesda. Like, they're a legend. They're a massive legendary studio, prolific studio, who've also had some humongous clangers for the most part of the last decade. Like, they've got a lot to prove at this point. And for me, I mean, sci-fi is my favorite genre. Like, I'm going to you show me a stupid set of tubing coming out of some dude's suit, and I'm there for it. So I want to see whatever they put together. I want to see what their mark on the genre is. But yeah, this stuff seems pretty promising. The likes of the spacewalk. I like the look of that weird sci-fi shotgun thing. I want to know what that does. And so yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic, but it is still Bethesda, and I want to see more. But hopefully we'll be seeing more in E3 in just a month's time. So let us know what you think down in the comments below. Do you believe in Bethesda to be able to deliver on the likes of Starfield? And what do you think of all this new information as well? For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
And we'll catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.